Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michael Sullivan, VP Sales at SimActive, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's live workshop, Mapping Remote Environments, How Do You Get It Right? So I'm joined today by Don Cummins from Air Data Solutions. Don, thank you for being here. Uh,
Pleasure
could,
to be here.
Very good. Could you start by introducing yourself for our audience and telling us a little bit about Air Data Solutions?
Sure. Appreciate you inviting us back to the webinar, and it's always a pleasure to work with you. My name is Don Cummins. I'm the founder and president of Air Data Solutions. We're a full service mapping aircraft firm based in Natchitoches, Louisiana, which is about an hour south of Shreveport. Everybody always asks if we're from New Orleans because that's apparently the only town that anybody recognizes in Louisiana. So it's
Sure.
about kind of in the north central part of the boot. And our business model is to provide aircraft platforming services as well as mapping services. So we own and operate our planes and sensors, and then we platform other people's sensors as well. And our focus in kind of our niche market through the years has been developing projects that may be a little bit more off the main highway.
Sure.
So we work in remote places. We work on very short time schedules. We take on some pretty exotic projects, which tend to be pretty fun and interesting, but also sometimes quite challenging. And the one that we're going to talk about today is kind of fits right in that mold. So, Air Data Solutions was founded in 2014, and right here in Louisiana, we began life as an agriculture mapping company, flying farms and ranches around the south central U.S. And we expanded from that into oil and gas, power infrastructure, government municipality work, and that led us down through the years into Hawaii and Guam in the South Pacific. So now we're working coast to coast in the U.S. and in the Pacific regions. So it's been a pretty wild, interesting journey over the years.
I bet.
We currently have 10 pilots flying for us. We have about a staff of 10 permanent staff who handle all the data processing, the marketing, the financial work, all the back end stuff. And then we have our own maintenance base right here in Natchitoches, and we operate, own, and fly our own aircraft. Currently, we have 20 airplanes flying across the U.S. So that's us in a nutshell.
Very impressive. Thank you, Don, for the introduction, and great to have such a trailblazer like yourself in Air Data Solutions on the webinar. So thank you again.
Thank you.
So before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping items. You can subscribe to the SimActive newsletter for updates and upcoming webinars like this one. Another point is you can drop your questions in the Q&A box at any time during this webinar, and a member from our team will follow up with you with a written reply after the webinar. And finally, make sure you stay with us until the end. We'll run a short correlated 3D demo showcasing the interface and the general workflow in the software. So very good. Let's start. So today we'll cover primarily 4 different points: planning aerial missions in remote and restricted airspace, capturing high-resolution imagery for environmental monitoring, managing complex aerial operations and sensor systems, and processing large data sets to generate accurate insights. And Don mentioned it a bit. What is special about today is that we'll anchor the discussion around a real project that Don and his team conducted, a U.S. Navy environmental monitoring mission over Kaula Island in Hawaii. That sounds like a place I would want to go on vacation. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, Don. But to kick things off, can you give us a quick overview of that project and what made it unique?
Sure. So this project had its roots several years ago, and this is actually the second time that we've performed this project. Uh, Kaula, Hawaii, I don't know, I still don't know if I say it right, but I also did not know it existed until we were tasked with this proposal, and it's actually beyond the standard Hawaiian island chain that you normally see on the map. You go out past Kauai, and then you pass Niihau, which is also called the Forbidden Island, and that is natives only live on that island. And when you after you pass Niihau, then you get to this little rock that is you can't see if you're on the island itself. I don't believe you could see any land around it. So it's very, very remote and deep in the Pacific. And you can see it on some maps. If you zoom in on Google Earth, if you know where to look, it does show up. But it's a very small rock, about 1,500 acres in size, and it's home to a lot of unique and protected bird species. And that was the gist of this project, was keeping keeping a record of the population of the birds that inhabit the island, as well as monk seals and some of the other wildlife that are native to that island.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Don. So great introduction. Let's jump in. I'll start by, we'll start by discussing a bit about expanding a bit more about remote environments, right? Which is what this project was, in fact. So when you're working in a remote or environmentally sensitive areas, the conditions are very different from standard mapping projects, right? I think everyone can agree on that. You're dealing with, I would assume in this case, with isolation, with terrain variations, with access, to name a few examples. Can you, in your experience, I mean, what makes this mission, fundamentally different from more typical aerial surveys your firm? I mean, I know you mentioned your firm is known for taking, dairy projects, if I may say, but what made that mission fundamentally different from more standard aerial surveys? Yeah.
Yeah, so this was somewhat unique because of all those things that you just mentioned, but there's also a feeling that you're at the edge of the earth when
Sure.
you're out here. And of course, I'm not from Hawaii, so being that far from major land masses gives a unique perspective. And a bit of the qualities that this job requires you to prepare for, to kind of sum that up, one is there's obviously no facilities, no accommodations at all when you get out here. So once you depart, which we left from Honolulu and Oahu, so
Sure.
once you depart, you have no options to land, fix sensors, get fuel, take care of any kind of issues on the way. You're committed. And if anything doesn't work properly, the only option is to return all the way to base and to restart the mission. And of course, that's always a nuisance on normal projects, but on this one, we are also restricted by time windows because this is restricted airspace. So
Sure.
we've committed to a specific time frame, down to the hour, that the military will allow us to operate in this area. We've communicated and coordinated that for months in advance. And then we have to just hope and pray the weather cooperates with us on that day as well. So all the planning that we can do to prepare for it is of course done in advance. And then there's a bit of luck that goes into the actual collection window and the conditions that you're given. So those are some of the characteristics that make it somewhat unique. And then the other is, once you strike out across the way towards this island, you leave all land masses. You have no visible reference to anything, so you're 100% relying on your navigation and your guidance. And for people who work in across the oceans, this may become more natural, but I flew this mission the first time myself, so it was really a surreal feeling when you
Sure.
are heading out 200, 300 miles offshore, and now you're trusting that that magenta line that you're following is in fact true. And until that island shows up in the distance, you of course second guess everything. So you're looking for the sun, and you're looking for waves
Sure.
and clouds that might give you some kind of reference to you're heading in the right direction. And of course, it all worked. GPS is a wonderful marvel, and
Of
it's
course.
almost always right. And so once you arrive on the island, then you have some other unique challenges. One is the exact reason you're there is mapping the birds, and birds, of course, fly all over the place. So there's a large population of birds on this island. We were limited to fly not below a certain altitude in order to provide the least disturbance to the birds as possible. So that is actually what led us to the choice of the aircraft and the cameras that we used. And because we had to maintain a certain altitude and a certain speed and still capture the resolution that was needed to identify these birds. So, but still, a lot of the birds are flying above us and around us, and so you have to avoid these at all times because they obviously have the right of way and they
Yeah.
can go where they want. So, just managing risks in that way, making sure that we always knew how far we were from the nearest airport. If we had to return for whatever reason, then we, had plenty of fuel reserves to get there. But a lot of it is just confidence in your equipment that everything is going to work properly so that you can get out there and get the mission done and get back.
Awesome. I mean, yeah, that's very impressive, and that sounds a little scary, Don. But yeah, that's very impressive. So I think, I mean, I'm going to say the obvious here, but obviously this is really a type of mission that can only be done with an airplane, right? Based on how remote it is. Can you share how long the flight was from Honolulu initially?
It was about a 4 hour
Okay.
complete mission there and back.
Okay.
And yes, we did actually consider using a helicopter, but the range exceeded the helicopter's ability to fly out there, get the mission collected and back. So the only option would have been to launch a helicopter from a boat, which would have been enormously more expensive and a lot more coordination to do that. So
Right.
the aircraft was the best platform for it. The limitations the aircraft provided was speed. You can only go so slow. And but of course, we with modern cameras that was a bit of a concern, but we were able to slow down enough to get the resolution needed at the
Very
altitude
good.
we were flying.
Very good, Don. Thank you. So we touched upon it already a little bit, but I still want to talk a little bit about mission planning and airspace regulations. It's I feel like it's such a critical part of the success of a mission in such environments.
Hmm.
Can you share a little bit what that looked like in terms of coordination? I mean, what were the stakeholders involved? How early did you have to start planning for this mission? Just yeah, a few items like this.
Sure. We started planning this mission at least 6 months in advance.
Okay.
The stakeholders involved basically was the airspace controlling agency for the island itself, plus all the airspace we flew through to get there. So we departed Honolulu class Bravo, so obviously coordinate with them. And then we go to radar control through the Pacific, and then with the actual range control over the island itself, which is inside a permanent restricted area. So that coordination was done directly with the U.S. Navy. And of course, we had talked with them on the ground. We'd had safety meetings and briefings with their team several times prior to conducting this mission, so they knew exactly who we were, what we were doing. It was their mission, so they asked for it to be done. We just had to inform them when and where and how we would operate. So all that was pretty much coordinated down to the minute, which direction the lines would be flown, what altitude, when we would arrive, when we would leave. So the coordination was pretty well developed, and that's also quite helpful. You don't always have the time or budget to do that with normal missions, but when you do that level of pre-flight planning, it typically makes a mission go off much better, because all of the things that could jump up and get you, you've pretty much thought through and hopefully have mitigated before you even begin. So, fortunately, both times we've flown this mission, it has turned out very well. Everything went as planned, and a lot of that credit goes to the flight planning software, the navigation software, the camera systems, and then of course the processing at the end, being able to accept and work with all that data. So happy to report that the planning did pay off.
Oh, very good, very good. And actually, that's a good transition. So obviously, all the pre-planning that you guys do meticulously, a bit of good fortune as well with the flying conditions and everything. And obviously, it comes down as well, like you mentioned, to the hardware working efficiently, which goes without saying. So let's talk a bit about acquisition strategy. Once you're in the air, obviously everything comes down to how well the hardware works and how well the acquisition is designed for the environment. So, John, for that specific mission, how did you approach data capture for this project? Perhaps, a starting point is what sensors were you using in terms of, camera sensor, flight planning, IMU? Can you share a bit about that?
Sure. The camera system we used was the Phase 1 Pass 280.
Sure.
And the first time we used it, the system was still fairly new. I believe we were the second company in the US to operate that system. And we had been operating the Pass 100 and several other individual Phase 1 cameras for many years. And so we knew the reliability of these cameras, their systems, and their hardware. And so we trusted enough to put it in this plane in this remote environment. We have to ship the system via FedEx from the mainland to Hawaii. Then we have to unbox it and install it in the plane, do the test flying of it, and then deploy it. So all of that is takes a lot of time, but also is a big pucker factor, making sure that it arrives on time and
For
safely.
sure.
And actually, the worst part of the entire process was the shipping, and there were components broke on the system when it arrived in
Mm.
Honolulu, and the packaging looked like they dropped it out of the airplane and drug it across the tarmac. We of course put lots of cushion around it, so nothing nothing was broken that couldn't be fixed in the field, but the system had gone through some pretty rough handling on the
Uh,
way. And I say that to say that's a testament to the system, because once we bolted everything back together and got it up and running, it worked flawlessly. So we were really thrilled to see that, because it was quite concerning when we unboxed it. um, in the air, we always take a redundant system with us on projects like this. It's not the same system, but it's something that we can fall back on if we have to.
sure.
So we carried extra Phase 1 cameras and actually use those to capture some oblique photos, just handheld an IXU RS1000 camera out the window, and we captured some pretty amazing oblique shots of the island with this 100 megapixel camera. So that was our backup plan, and we were able to get some good photos with it just because we were there and had it available as well. So redundancy, planning and redundancy is really the key to making sure that these projects do go off without a hitch.
Very good. It's crazy to think that it's the shipping part that was the most risky basically of this whole project, right? But it's something indeed to
Yeah,
consider
yeah.
for such projects. So perhaps a follow-up question I have, and it's specific as well to this project. It seems like the terrain, I mean, it's a remote island, a lot of terrain variation. How did you approach flight altitude? Were you, I mean, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the terrain on this island, even though it's not very big, has a pretty massive elevation change
Sure.
in a very small area. So the the cliff walls are sheer on some sides. So they're vertical cliff walls rising, I want to say up to 1,000 to 1,500 feet above sea level. So you basically have this large rock outcropping poking out of the ocean. So we had to plan this quite differently than a normal large area collection. and it involved actually planning some areas of the island at different altitudes and different line directions. Even though it was quite small and short lines, we still had such varied terrain differences that we in order to maintain the resolution across the entire area, we did have to make some several different line altitudes and directions to capture that. And then we also flew obliques around the sides of all of the cliff walls so that we could get that slant angle range and capture a good GSD resolution on the sides of the cliffs, which is if you have an oblique system that's doing that for you, that's kind of built in. But we did that manually on this project because we weren't running a multi oblique system.
Okay, very good. And can you confirm the GSD in that case for this project for the nadir portion and the oblique, if you remember?
It was less than 2 centimeters.
Okay, very good. So highly detailed imagery, essentially. Very
Right,
good.
right. Yeah, the goal was to not only count the birds, but also to identify the species.
Sure.
And for that, they had to have enough resolution to tell the different types of birds by color, shape, size, etc.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Don. So let's discuss a bit about an equally important part, processing and data processing and workflow. So after the acquisition, the challenge shifts, right, to turning that data into usable mapping products, I would call them, with large data sets or complex environment data sets. This whole data processing section can become a bottleneck if not handled properly in our experience. So at SimActive, we've seen teams rely on structured workflows in Correlator 3D to manage this efficiently. Don, what did processing look like on your side for this project? Can you run us through a little bit what happened after once the data was brought back?
Right, right. And like you said, that you have to have confidence in your processing abilities that it matches with the camera systems, the flight planning that you've done, that you will indeed get the types of data out of that and with the processing that you're doing. And we've worked with SimActive correlator processing for many years, and we do a lot of, I guess, unique projects with it. So it's not always just vanilla wide area processing. In this particular case, we're using multiple altitudes of lines, different side overlap, different forward overlap. So it's basically like processing several different missions into one. And the reasons for that was the different data deliverables that the client was looking for actually required us to process in 2 or 3 different ways. And we had confidence that it would all come together in the end because of our prior experience with the phase 1 cameras and the correlator software. And actually the results were to me were very very interesting and much better than I even expected, because the only imagery and terrain modeling that we could get of this island was pretty low resolution. And when we started developing this ourselves with our high res imagery, it was a really unique view of that island and that environment. And even from flying over it, seeing it with my own eyes, when you're able to build that model and look at it in 3D and then look at the high resolution images that come out of that, the results were quite amazing. So we actually flew extremely high side overlap, like up to 80%. And for one of the models, we processed all of that imagery, and for another, we took out every other line. And that allowed us to improve our count statistics, because part of the problem was trying to count the correct number of birds,
Sure.
all of the birds, and the other half of the problem was not counting all the birds twice.
Sure.
And how do you merge those two ranges into the perfect optimal number? So it took a lot of thought and arguments and discussions between the teams to try to settle on that ideal scenario where we get the best bird count possible. And in the end, there's always some margin of error, but looking at past data sets and the way that this was done in the past is either done on the ground with people on foot actually counting with their eyes and binoculars, or from boats in the distance, and all of that is very intrusive to the wildlife. And
Sure.
the count statistics were very erratic. So either the populations ebbed and flowed tremendously over the years, or the counts were not accurate. And since this has been done with airborne sensors, the counts have been a lot more standardized. So I feel like the results that they're getting now through these through mapping cameras are the best they've ever been able to get. And so I guess long answer to your
No, that's
question.
very good, Don. That's very good. That's
Yeah.
very good. Perhaps one quick question I would have is, do you process on-prem or on the cloud in that case? I mean, I guess obviously with the end user, there's some considerations I would assume, but yeah, did you process locally or on a cloud setup?
We process everything locally.
Okay,
So we QA the data in the plane initially, and then once we land in the field, and then everything comes back to our office in Louisiana for local processing.
okay, very good,
Mm.
very good. So we mentioned it a little bit, but let's discuss about the outputs and the use case, right? The end goal here goes beyond mapping. You mentioned it a little bit. It's bird counting. It's about generating information that can be, actually used. Um, how were? Do you know how the final outputs were used by the end user once the processing was complete? So, and can you explain a little bit what the deliverable was? Was it Othos? Was it DSMs? Was it a final number, or how did that look like?
It was all of the above.
Okay,
So this was a entire suite of, hey, can you do this too? And so, yes, we produced the DSMs and the DEMs. The funny thing is the DSM and the DEM look basically identical because there's
sure,
no vegetation on
sure,
this rock to speak of. But that was important because part of the species identification is based on the size of the bird, and the size of the bird changes by how close it is to the aircraft. So we have to know the altitude of every bird, and that's only produced by having a good DEM model. So when we count the birds, we do more than count them. We geographically place them in time and space, and then we can get measurements of the birds. We can get an identification of what they are, how large they are, how high they're flying, and then we can build these models of where these birds are congregating at, where they're flying
sure,
at, where they're standing at, where they're nesting at. So the company who put all this together was is an environmental firm, and so this is what they do is track these bird species and other wildlife, and then they basically model where they live, what they do, and track this over time so that the end user can use that information to determine, are the populations growing, are they healthy, do we need to manage them in some different way. And it's really it was a fascinating process seeing them do that work, because our job was to find the birds, and once
sure.
we found the birds, we give them over to the environmental firm to do all of this analysis on them, and we got to see the end result, which was really, really interesting. And my hat's off to them, because there's a lot of research and expertise that goes into taking that data that we provided and making it into something useful. And the end result is you pretty much know exactly where your birds are, what kind they are, how many there are, the date they were here, and that's really useful information.
Very impressive. Thank you, Don. Have you? I assume you must have looked into this. Probably. Have you considered using AI for this? So once you have the final orthomosaic, I imagine, then you do the counting, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Did your team consider using AI? Can you share a bit about this,
Y- Yeah,
about
yeah,
that portion?
we did, and I'll be honest, the team does not enjoy counting thousands of birds for days and days.
Sure.
So it's a great case for AI. And we're not an AI company, but we do have some very smart technicians in the back who do work in that field. And they did use some machine learning to do these bird counts as a cross check to the manual counts. So everything was counted manually by our team. And then we also did some work teaching the computers to locate the birds themselves. The the main problem we ran into was false positives because most of these birds, especially the blackbirds, had a black shadow and they looked identical. And
Right.
the only way to separate those was with the knowledge that this bird looks like it's a exact replica of it at the same angle as the rest of the birds have an exact replica because the sun is shining from this degree. So we weren't able to teach that into the model yet. And I think in other environments, or maybe under a solid overcast sky where there is not the shadowing effect, or where the birds are higher or on the ground, that might not be such an issue, and we could have much better results with AI. But it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, very good. That's very interesting. I feel I'm not an expert in AI either, but that's what the limitation of AI is in many cases, right? False positives and that small margin of error that in the end you need an actual human to give it a validation, like a check mark, or to boot it out. So I think that's a really good
Right.
example of a project that outlines this. Thank you again, Don. We're nearing the end here. We'll leave a bit of time for a demo of Correlator 3D from one of our photogrammetry specialists. So I want to thank you again and Air Data Solutions for sharing these insights. I think this really was a fascinating project to discuss.
Well, thank you.
So, of
Yep.
course,
It
of
was a
course,
it was a fascinating project. I always enjoyed talking about it, and thank you for having me visiting with you on this.
my pleasure. My pleasure, Don. Just finish with a quick note. So don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for future webinars like this one. And as promised, I'll now hand things over to David Alamillo for a short demo of Correlated 3D. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, Michael, and let's continue with the demo portion of our webinar. I would like to thank again Don for your excellent overview of data collection and everything you guys need to do as far as prepping for these type of surveys that again are on the difficult side of collecting data. Um, they always require a lot of planning and again a lot of flexibility back at the office to process some of these data sets. As you guys saw, there's a lot of things that are out of Don's control, and a lot of things, of course, he plans for. But weather is one of those things that, again, you kind of have to go with it, depending on what the weather type is. So sometimes you have to come and remove certain images from your flights. Something I would like to touch base on what Don was describing is the flight line editing tool. It's a very simple tool, but at the same time very powerful. I really like the way he described the edits he did to the flight lines and how that affected directly the results he obtained, right? And in this case, less was more. And I always love to say this to our folks who are flying for the first times and just getting their feet wet into photogrammetry, bumping up that overlap, increasing that GSD to the maximum sometimes creates results that are not the best. Um, and I've seen this, because sometimes just from collecting data, you bump up that overlap, increase the GSD, and then you're back at the office with half a terabyte of data. You're like, oh my God, how did I collect half a terabyte of data? Yep. With the sensors again being increased and the megapixels are higher and higher. Now you even see this from your phone. You shoot video in 4K and then you're enabled to share a 6 gig video. And that, of course, is exponentially higher when you're dealing with high resolution sensors. So I always like to remind folks, working with your photogrammetrist, working with the team back at the office can help you sometimes create the outputs that you need. And Correlator 3D is flexible in that way that will let you work with those inputs and again produce different results, maybe from a different DSM perspective resolution, or simply editing your flight lines. So let's get into that first. We're seeing here again is a flight capture with phase 1 RS-280, and what we're going to do as the first step is going to go into the aerial triangulation module, and this will load up all our flight lines. Now, this is something you guys are very used to when you import your images or open up the flight line. Again, the aerial triangulation module, the software will prompt you to do a tie point extraction. So that's the first step. Typically, you won't see the links. These are created post tie point extraction. So you're going to see something like this. And what I like to remind folks is right after you import your images, this is the first step, right? Go into cleaning up your images. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with a medium, large format sensor, or you're dealing with a UAV. I think this applies even more to UAV data. So what you want to do is going to go all the way top hand corner, playing with a pencil. And what you want to do is remove a couple of the images. In drones, sometimes they return images. With us, in this case with Dawn, it was removing every other image. So how do we do that? Well, recently I was presented with this task, and one of the persons I was actually showing the software for the first time challenged me to remove the first and last image of every flight line. And of course I took on the challenge, and I wanted to show off a little bit of the tools and use the polygon selection tool. And I told him it's actually quite simple. I can do it in 2 polygons. And he was like, well, yeah, you selected them. What do you do now? So I was like, you simply click the X. And he was like, no, it can't be that easy. I was like, no, yeah, it is. And we actually go to the bottom flight line and we remove the first, and you said the last, right? He was like, yeah, like, there we go. We just disabled those. So again, that was me showing off. But in this case, let's see if we wanted to do Don's pretty much edit of what he did of removing every other image. What we can actually do is go into your project tree and remove exactly that. So we disabled image 1, we'll disable 3, and keep 2 and 4. And we'll go here and disable this, that, and then this one, and there we go. Removed every other image from our flight lines. And we can go on. I sometimes use even my keyboard to select the images. I know this is a little faster sometimes than actually clicking on the image itself. And if you want to be fancy, again, one of my colleagues does Python scripting, so even before he goes into Correlator, he'll do it via Python and remove every other image, kind of a georeferencing specific selection. So you can be fancy like that, but if you don't want to go into Python and be fancy like that, you can always come in here and do this easy removal of images. So once you've done your edits, you simply go with playing with a pencil and confirm your edits. And if you've been in one of my demos, I always demonstrate this first. If you made a mistake, you can always come into the flight line editing tool and remove that image. That step, sorry, where you remove those images. So that's, again, very, very nice. And it's something that I always like to demonstrate because it's a very useful tool. Now, as you saw, of course, Don said that removing certain images gave him certain outputs, or they were different. But let's say that you do want to AT all your images. Maybe you have a collection of oblique images plus your nadir images, and you have them separated into groups. Well, let's say you say, hey, I just want to remove every other image for the DSM generation, but I still want to keep them as part of my AT. Complete your AT using all your collection of images. After you're done with your AT, the results are excellent, then you can come in here and remove every other image. And you won't remove them per se, but you will disable the image. So this is not removing the image from the project, but simply disabling the image prior to maybe orthorectifying or creating the DSM, right? So you might say, hey, I want to run several tests out of this, maybe like Don did, and then basically don't disable the images from the start, but disable them after they've been AT'd. So if we disable every other image here and we access the DSM generation module, the software will do an estimation of the resolution based on the images that we have enabled in our project tree. Again, That's something that maybe we haven't covered before in one of our webinars, but I thought this was very relevant in this particular case. So the software will again read those images and not take into account all the ones that we've disabled, and then give us the GSD based on this specific selection of images. So let's take a look at, while the software is doing that, what is our resolution. So the resolution the software is given is optimal. In this case, is 1.41 feet. And that's the optimal resolution the software is giving us. And again, we're going to turn off right now the generate point cloud option and just look at this option, which is resolution. And then it's giving us the maximal resolution, which is 0.29 feet. This is based on the image selection that we have right now. So we could easily generate, again, an optimal resolution DSM and output that at 1.45 feet. Now, what happens if I want to mess around with this number? I can always do this. And I always never recommend going one-to-one, guys, because the amount of noise you get sometimes from these particular outputs is quite heavy, especially in water, which is very common, right? And dense vegetation. So if you're mapping some of these difficult terrains, I would say go with something optimal, multiply this number times 3, and then, of course, you'll get that desired resolution. And I think working with something like that should give you very good results. Now, something that we can even do, and taking the same concept, is if you have a difficult area over water, and you know, it's combined with other areas, but you really want to see how the DSM looks over that area, disable all the images that are not water and leave the images that cover that specific difficult area and generate a DSM. It can even be a coarse resolution just to see how that looks, right? Before we go into mapping 1,000 images. So that's something I always like to do, small tests like that to see if I'm getting the results I need from that difficult area. And again, you can play around with the resolution. So let's take a look now at enabling back all our images and see how, again, that resolution again is obviously increased based on that selection. So simply as enabling those, going back into our DSM generation module, the software will estimate the resolution once more. So we'll wait for the software heal to finish that. And we're going to hit our optimal, which is now 0.35. So you guys can see how enabling those images, of course, I have a higher resolution, higher GSD based on my image selection, and maximal went down to 0.7071, which is an overkill, of course. What I typically would do with a large selection like this, multiply my maximal resolution times 3, which will get 21, and we'll go with this resolution, not 12, sorry, 21. And that would be typically my output. I always go with 3 times my maximal GSD, and then that's what I use as an output. Can you have 3 or 4 DSMs with different outputs? Absolutely. I can have one at optimal, maximal, and coarse. And the software will let you run this several times. So that's something you guys can definitely take care of. Once we process again, the next thing we're going to do is review our DSM. And that's something I want to highlight here. We have all our images. Of course, this DSM was generated with using all our images. So something we might want to do is crop this to the extent of my images. I typically recommend doing that always after generating a DSM, is going directly into the DM editing tool and then simply cropping to the edge of my image extent. Sometimes I'll leave a little more, but typically just cropping those edges to where my image extent is or my AOI is. Please forgive me for my crude polygon here, but again, this is just a quick representation of where my flight line is and where typically that AOI ends, right? I don't need to go past beyond that specific boundary. So let's do that. And after that modification has been done, the next thing we're going to do is save our DSM and move on. And you can see there's a history to that as well. So we have our original DM and the crop we've done. So we can always go back to our original DM and complete doing certain edits. So these are a couple of things that I wanted to touch based on Don's comments about how he obtained different outputs based on removing certain images, working with your resolution. And the last thing, of course, that I have here is another option to generate your point cloud. A lot of folks do the true optimized DSM, which is a very good option, and you guys can do this by simply enabling the point cloud will generate a DSM that it's true ortho optimized. as the name states, virtual ortho rectification. But you also generate a point cloud, which in some cases can be useful to generate your Gaussian splat. So as you guys saw on our previous webinar, you guys can simply load up your Gaussian splat if that's what you guys need to output, and do that fairly easily. So let's take a look at that really quick. And here we have our Gaussian splat generated from our point cloud, which again, it's nadir, so we won't see a lot of the features from the oblique. As Don was saying, sometimes flying that oblique sensor will give you a little bit of more information and returns over your facades and whatnot. But again, it's something that a lot of folks are getting into today. And again, it can be done from large format sensors, medium format sensors, and they look quite good actually. So I really like the fact this was generated from the point cloud. Remember folks, you do need a point cloud to generate this output. So again, very nice. If you guys have any questions, we have several channels where you guys can go through. Most important is our support portal. Please don't feel shy to reach out to us via our support portal, create a ticket. For all you guys asking questions, we'll be more than happy to answer those. So you'll receive an email directly from us. And again, that's really a wrap for today. And thank you very much, guys, for your time. We appreciate it. Bye.